Does your business provide a quality service or product? If the answer is yes, then there is a combination of tactics that can be customized to fit your unique business that makes your business super profitable, creates wealth, and makes a difference in the process. I know this because I've built a few tiny businesses to more than $70 million. You're listening to the Entrepreneurs Radio Show. Conversations with self-made millionaires and high-level entrepreneurs that will grow your business. Hey, it's Travis Lane Jenkins. Welcome to episode number 108 of the Entrepreneurs Radio Show, a production of RockstarEntrepreneurNetwork.com, where each and every week I connect you with rockstar entrepreneurs that explain their journey to success and what the key principles have been to them finding a high level of success as an entrepreneur. Now, today I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Arlen Meyers. Although before we get started, I want to take a brief minute and recognize another listener for writing us a great review and giving us a 5-star rating over on iTunes before we get started. This review comes from Richard Krozik, Mr. Blueprint, from here in the United States. Richard writes great content and great content-rich podcast. That is the headline. 5 stars. Gives me some great feedback there. Thank you very much, Richard. I really appreciate it. Just in case you don't know, writing a review really helps us reach more entrepreneurs just like yourself. So if you have the time and you find value in the show, I'd really appreciate it if you'd go and leave us a review and tell us how we're doing. And of course, I'll recognize you on air by saying thank you personally. One other thing I want to cover is I want to apologize for missing publishing a new episode last week. Unfortunately, I was sick for several days and wasn't able to get out before the deadline. So I apologize for that. I believe in consistency, and I know consistency builds trust, and that's not like me to miss deadlines. I normally have a reserve of shows in kind of a backlog, and unfortunately I didn't this time. The good news is I'm back to good health and back on track. One last thing. Remember, there's 3 ways you can take these interviews with you on the go: through iTunes, Android, or Stitcher. Just go to RockstarEntrepreneurNetwork.com. Click on the iTunes, Android, or Stitcher button right there on the menu, and it will take you directly to the podcast rather than having to type it in and trying to find it, where you can subscribe to the show there. Now that we got all that out of the way, let's get down to business. Without further ado, welcome to the show, Arlen.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule. I don't know if you've listened to the show very much, but one of the things I like to do is get the backstory of what brought you to where you are today. Would you mind sharing that with us?
Sure. I was born and raised in Philadelphia and was educated back east in a fairly traditional academic medical track. When I completed my, I'm an ear, nose, and throat surgeon by training, and when I completed my residency, I was recruited to the University of Colorado to be part of an academic department, which I've been part of ever since, and that was back in 1976, so it's been a long time. As part of my academic career development, I was interested in bioengineering, and more specifically biophotonics, which is the interaction of light with human tissue. I was interested in that as a way to solve ear, nose, and throat problems, one of which was oral cancer. Since I'm a head and neck surgeon, which was sort of a subspecialty of what I do. So to make a very long story short, as part of my academic career in research and development, publishing, tenure track, all that business, we collaborated and invented a device that optically detects cancer. Basically, it's a gadget that you shine in the mouth, and if it lights up, it says you have cancer. That led to technology transfer, intellectual property protection, patents, regulatory reimbursement, et cetera, to the point where we eventually created a company called Oncolite to commercialize the device, and the rest, as they say, was history. What I learned from the reason that I really got involved in what I do is that experience and many others as an intrapreneur and as an entrepreneur in an academic setting is how difficult it is for people trying to do what I do to get it done. Most doctors and a lot of people have ideas, but they just don't know what to do with them.
Right.
And they don't know how to navigate the barriers, and that's basically what I've dedicated our work to.
Okay. You said bioengineering. Is that correct?
Correct.
What is that specifically?
It's the intersection of engineering to solve biomedical and health problems. In other words, and it's actually one of the fastest growing engineering careers in engineering. So basically, you take mechanical, electrical, computer science, the traditional engineering disciplines, and apply them to medicine. So the typical example is a biomedical engineer who works with a bunch of people to build a medical device or devise a medical device, or in this case, or more recently, build a digital health application. So it's the intersection of engineering with medicine.
Okay. All right. And one of the reasons why I asked that is you and I were talking about this before the show, and the listeners of the show are not just doctors in general. It's really kind of a wide range of entrepreneurs. And one of the things that I've noticed in my 20 plus years of being an entrepreneur is when left brain and right brain skills are developed to a high level, normally you will find that the entrepreneur is much more successful. And now most entrepreneurs, that don't have a background that comes from where you have, are right brainers, and they lack a lot of the left brain skills. And then I found that doctors a lot of times are left brainers that don't have a lot of the right brain skills. However, I coach a lot of doctors, and I found that doctors are very easy to coach because they've already learned how to distill information and apply it, so they catch on very quickly. What do you think about that whole right brain, left brain thing, and do you agree with it?
Well, I agree with some of the things you said, and I disagree with others. And let me just step back a minute and say that, there are an awful lot of parallels between physicians and how they do their work and entrepreneurs and how they do their work. And the simplistic way of my explaining this is that just like there is an art and technoscience to medicine, there is an art and science to entrepreneurship. So the art part is what you're referring to as right brain skill, and the technoscience is what you're referring to, as I understand it, to left brain skill.
Right.
And the example I would use is that when you go to see a doctor, and some people have bemoaned the fact that the art of medicine is being destroyed by techno-hype. But the fact of the matter is that most people, when they go to a doctor, expect some sort of art. And what that means is intuition, gut feeling, experience, communication, empathy, etc., as they apply it to the patient. I would make the same argument in entrepreneurship. A lot of entrepreneurs, and you may be one of them, and I know I am, make what we call gut decisions. It's based on, you have a fact pattern in front of you, which may tell you one thing, but your gut tells you something else. To me, that's an example of the art of entrepreneurship that, while it can be taught, may not necessarily be learned other than through the school of hard knocks and experience.
Right.
In medicine, we call it clinical judgment. In business, we call it business wisdom. It's the same kind of thing. So my argument to your question is, I think that entrepreneurs and physicians or physician entrepreneurs have both capabilities, in a lot of respects, though, they don't understand how to apply them. Right. Nor do they understand they even have those skills.
Right. Right. Well, so to take that a little further, and again, I don't want to make this a conversation just for doctors, but I want everybody to think about what we're talking about here. Now, early on, using your example as a very young entrepreneur, and even in the mid-years of being an entrepreneur, I based a lot of things on gut. And there's a time and a place for that gut, but empirical needs, the facts need to be analyzed first, and most people have not set up systems in their business to where they can empirically tell what is or is not happening. That gut aspect of things comes in either different situations or later in the decision process. You agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that, again, businesses and leaders of businesses, need dashboards. They need, the latest buzz is analytics and intelligence, but they need dashboards to identify the critical success factors and monitor them on a real-time basis. Well, again, going back to the physician entrepreneur example, doctors do that every single day, every single time they see a patient. We take a history, we do a physical, we look at lab tests, we come up with a differential diagnosis, we decide what we think is wrong, and we institute a treatment plan. And we have certain metrics and outcomes that we monitor. If people are getting better, great. If they're not getting better based on those metrics, then what we do is change the treatment plan. What business and lean startup gurus are now calling pivoting. Well, right. Physicians have been doing med-surg pivoting ever since the beginning of time. They're used to doing that. It's an experiment. It's a clinical trial. It's a clinical response. If you get better, great. We assume things are working. Or, you're getting better. Whether the treatment made a difference or not, who knows? But if it's not working, we have to monitor that and pivot. So we're used to doing that. But again, doctors don't know what they don't know when it comes to entrepreneurship, and that's one of the missions that we're trying to fill.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. So for me, those are KPIs. I completely agree with you on the dash. So KPI is key performance indicators. What are some of those? Do you have a set of key performance indicators in a business that you like to look at that tell you your business is functioning the way that it should be?
Well, to me, at the very high level, when we're talking about biomedical and health innovation and entrepreneurship, and I think this applies to any entrepreneurial endeavor, at the very high initial level, you have to ask yourself what I call the 3W's. Is this something that customers want? That's the first W. Number two, is this business worth it? In other words, you're going to put an awful lot of time and effort and brain damage into this, and either from a personal satisfaction standpoint or an economic standpoint, is it worth pursuing? And you have to answer that with the hard facts: market size, market growth, market potential, etc. Or, as I said, intrinsically, how are you going to measure success internally, and it's going to make you feel good and follow your passion? So that's the second W. And the third is, can you win at it? Because there's no point in tinkering, particularly in healthcare. So, this old GE thing, they're not going to create something where they're not going to dominate a market and be first, maybe second. In healthcare, it has to be the same thing. You have to go big or go home. And if you're not going to win, then just fold up shop and do something else.
Okay, so I think I missed the third one. So the first is it worth it? Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Do customers want it?
Oh, want it. Okay.
Is it worth it, and can you win at it?
Oh, can you win at it? Okay, all right. And so you feel like even, say, a local business, if they can't dominate their local area, then they should reconsider whether they should specialize in that at all? Is that what I understand you to say?
Well, that's what I'm saying in healthcare. I mean, obviously, there are entrepreneurs who create businesses, and they're simply lifestyle businesses. They're looking to create a reasonable living. It could be a Me Too business. It could be a similar product competing with an existing entity. But in my view, I mean, that's just me. I wouldn't do that. First of all, the cost of competing and the cost of sales, entering a market where there are a lot of competitors, is much more difficult. So I urge people to innovate and create things that haven't yet been created, because it's easier. It's not always easier. In fact, it's harder. The iPod or the whole Apple story is a perfect example. Create something people didn't know they needed. Well, that wasn't easy, but look at the result.
Right. Yeah, one of the most profitable companies on the planet.
Right. So I think healthcare needs the same thing. We can't tinker.
Okay, so one of the common problems that I see, and I'd like to hear your perspective on this, is most businesses have not set systems up where they can tell what's generating profit and what's causing them to lose money. And when you provide a large variety of services, and maybe this is where the specializing in one thing comes in. Is there more KPIs, or is there more parts of that dashboard where you teach people how to hone in on the profitable parts of their business? I have found that more often than not, 80% of what businesses are doing are not profitable.
Well, the general answer is measuring. Creating a dashboard and key performance indicators really depends on the business, and it depends on what the critical success factors are for your business. So let's say, for example, in health, which I know best, and biomedicine, if you're trying to get a drug to market, if you're trying to get a device to market, you're going to have certain key performance indicators that you have to, number one, be successful in growing the business, but more importantly, getting money. In other words, clinical trial success, intellectual property protection, regulatory affairs and reimbursement clearance, that kind of stuff. So those are the key benchmarks, and those are the key indicators. And if you don't hit those benchmarks, you're dead in the water. When you look at digital health, that is the application of information and communications technologies to improving health, it's been found that the single biggest predictor of success will be the speed of scale. In other words, how rapidly can you grow this business and get eyeballs in front of the screen, if that's what you're intending to do. If you're building an iPhone app to help people we have some fairly large and numerous digital health companies in Colorado that I'm involved with. If you're trying to build an iPhone app to help infertile couples monitor their reproductive cycles, or if you're trying to build a website to help diabetics maintain adherence to their treatment plan, or if you're trying to build something to reduce childhood obesity, there are a number of issues that are key performance indicators, but probably the one that that's most important is the rapidity with which you scale that business. If you don't get early traction and scale it, it's likely to stall. So that's the key performance indicator. And if you're not making the numbers day to day, week to week, month to month, something is wrong and you need to fix it. Otherwise, you're going to be dead in the water.
Right. So these are product-based type situations as opposed to service, because a lot of times the bottleneck with service is the capacity of performance, where products, apps, or whatever it is, there's not much of a bottleneck there. You can add 2,000 new customers tomorrow and 10,000 the following day. So that's what I hear. That's the path I hear you going down there.
But if you consider a physician practice as a time-limited a service business, I mean, you can only see so many patients in a day.
Right.
Well, if you're trying to build and scale a medical practice, for example, or some sort of health service organization business, you run into the same issues of, well, what do you manage and measure to maximize efficacy and efficiency. Probably the most prominent one now is accounts receivable, because as Obamacare has been rolled out, as first dollar health insurance has been eliminated, as the ACA is pushing more cost in deductibles and copays on the patients, it's getting harder and harder to collect that money up front from patients. So there are enormous revenue leaks that happen, and if you don't keep an eye on that as a key performance indicator, you just can't make it up in volume.
Yeah, and it becomes a cash flow problem, right?
Right. You go out of business.
Yeah, not only a profitability, but an instantaneous cash flow.
Right. And you lose, it's not very common, and the press likes to make a big deal out of it, but whenever a doctor goes bankrupt, they make a big deal out of it as either a right-wing or a left-wing argument for or against the healthcare system, when in fact it has really very little to do with that. It has to do with how the doctor/entrepreneur runs the business.
Right. Well, you keyed in on something that is a buzzword for me, and that was a Me Too type business. And so I completely agree with the problems with Me Too. I offer the same thing as the guy down the street. We're just better. And that's a very naive argument, and that's something that, I've been in business 24 years, and there was a time when there was such a plentiful amount of work for everybody that you could get away with Me Too type positioning, and that really doesn't work anymore. And I see a lot of doctors and business owners using the Me Too type marketing where they're focused on their credentials, their office, all of the things about them, rather than digging into what the problem is and then having a multi-step campaign that takes their prospect down a path that conditions them to ethically know, like, and trust them. What's your mindset on that, and do you have much experience with that?
My take on that is that the single biggest reason why doctors are now interested in innovation and entrepreneurship is because they have to. And you mentioned what you just said applies to healthcare. In the past, and you could argue, was that 2 years or 20 years, anyone who graduated medical school, did a residency, became board certified, could essentially practice medicine and make more than 99% of the people in the world by showing up.
Right.
You can't do that anymore. So you have to begin to differentiate yourself. You have to be able to demonstrate value. You have to be able to measure quality. You don't get a trophy for showing up anymore. You have to be able to demonstrate value. And that's true across the industry. So that has caused enormous problems because people don't like to change. Just look at the VA and what's going on there. I mean, organizations have certain cultures, and it's very difficult to change them when you change the rules. But healthcare is exactly the same, and physician entrepreneurship is the same. So if you're offering a Me Too orthopedic practice or a Me Too ENT practice, in fact, I would make the argument that that's the goal. You want the quality and the outcome of a given operation to be exactly the same every single place in the world. It's never going to happen, but you want to eliminate as much variability in the outcome of a procedure as possible so that you can take the quality for granted. That's not going on in the United States now or around the world. There are enormous disparities in outcomes of care and how different doctors do things. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that the outcomes were exactly the same, that every ENT doctor in the world had a 1% post-op bleeding rate after the operation, which is what the number should be. Well, if patients then commoditize mentally the outcome, now they're going to be more interested in service, access, speed, price, transparency, and the patient experience, which I think is happening more and more. And it's very difficult for doctors to make that transition because they're focused on quality of care. Patients, it's very difficult to measure or understand quality of medical care, So they focus on the things they can relate to. How long did I have to wait in the doctor's office? Did he see me or she see me on time? How hard is it to get him to return phone calls? Is it convenient? Do the office hours make sense? All that other stuff. So I think that's what we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Well, so one speaks to the delivery of the service, and the other one speaks to the positioning of the service. So, all of us like to believe if there's 5 doctors in an area that we're going to choose from, or 5 businesses that do the same thing, I want to choose the one for me that is going to provide me the best experience. And if something goes wrong, they're going to stand behind what it is that they offer. I want accountability, right? I'm not looking for a cheap price. And there's different segments of markets going on there, but I want the removal of risk. And so that's how you present the offer, which is different. And then after if that one business had multiple locations, then they would have a multi-step process to deliver a consistent result. I think those are kind of 2 ends of the spectrum that you're talking about, isn't it?
Well, what you just said is just your opinion. And basically what you're saying is whenever anyone buys or considers doing something, they do the cost benefit. And that cost benefit translates into value. So what value means is the difference between the tangible and intangible benefit of a product or service less the tangible or intangible costs. So you do the cost benefit. It's everything from who do you date to what do you buy. So you do the cost benefit, and you have certain value factors. You just mentioned access, convenience, accountability, price, whatever. But that's your individual mindset.
Right.
There are some patients, and telemedicine is an excellent example. There are some patients that will forego the perception of quality for convenience and access. So, for example, you're a mother, your 3-year-old wakes up with an earache at home at 2 a.m. The last thing you want to do is take your kid to an ER, sit there for 4 hours, and pay a fortune.
Right.
When your perception is, all I want is the doctor to prescribe an antibiotic. Whether the prescription of that antibiotic is the right thing to do or not, that's what you want. And you're willing to forego the possibility of poor quality for convenience and access. So it depends. There are some patients that want certain things and other patients that want others. And you can't be all things to all people as a business. So to get back to your question, you have to focus on what you think your target segment is and what products and services will solve their problem based on their value factor.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think we're getting into the core of what I think the problem is with most practices, most businesses, is they don't recognize that there are multiple types of clients and then go after those prospects in a very specific way. And to my point earlier, a multi-step system that educates the prospect can also eliminate a prospect that's not a good fit. So for me, there could be someone on the complete opposite end of the buying criteria, just like you explained. And there should be, I don't see any businesses targeting specific segments of those markets. And I think that's where a lot of the problems come into business. Or, I would disagree that you don't see any. I mean, they're called market leaders. The market leaders are those that are meticulous about targeting customer segments and satisfying their wants and needs. Right.
They don't try to be all things to all people.
Exactly.
And they understand. And an example is a orthopedic surgeon. Again, I'll use a medical example, but could apply to any business. An orthopedic surgeon, a friend of mine, has devised a software product, and you may or may not like this, but basically identifies patients who will generate maximal revenue. And I'm not saying he's compromising on quality of care, but if you think about it, you have a certain number of hours in a day, you have a certain number of appointment slots, and if, strictly from a business perspective, you want to maximize revenue, you should fill those appointment slots with people who are most likely to generate the most revenue. Businesses call it the highest profit margin. So you try to move up market, and you try to identify people with a given complaint who will then translate into a given procedure that generates revenue. And you eliminate the people who want to make appointments that won't generate as much revenue. Now, there's an argument that, well, isn't that two-tiered care? Aren't you rationing care? Aren't you being cold and callous in terms of applying business to medicine? Yes. And we can have that conversation some other time. But I'm just giving an example of how to maximize profit as a service business.
I think it's the way that business should be done. Very few people have taken the time to engineer a path that clearly speaks to their ideal avatar. You know, we call that an avatar. We sit down and list who that exact person is, what their education wants, what their income, every aspect of that individual is an avatar. And so I completely agree with you. Agree with it, and that way the business is positioned to deliver their absolute best to that prospect, no one else. So, I guess my statement was inaccurate because I say no one. I guess where I'm coming from is I very rarely see it, and it drives me crazy. And you're right, leaders of any industry normally have this down. So do you, in the things that you do with your business, do you guys set up any multi-step funnels or campaigns that automate this process and educate the prospect and move them down that channel like we're talking about?
Well, yeah. Well, I think it depends on the business. I'll give you a couple of examples. For example, in a digital health business, and we don't have to go into all the details, but in a digital health business, where basically you're trying to get the attention of prospects, you're trying to convert them to leads, and you're trying to convert those leads to customers. And there's a process for doing that. In fact, there's a very well worked out process, and people make lots of money doing consulting and create businesses translating prospects into customers. It's no different in a biomedical or health industry than other industries. And incidentally, it's no different for not-for-profits versus for-profits. So one of my activities is with the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, which is a global biomedical health innovation and entrepreneurship network. It's the largest physician entrepreneurship network in the world. Basically, we help people get their ideas to patients. We provide them education, resources, and networks. Well, I'm trying to grow and scale the organization. We've been reasonably successful in doing it. We've gone from 50 people in January of 2011 to approximately 12,000 on a LinkedIn site as of today. Well, how do we do that? How do you scale the business? In this case, a nonprofit, and it has to do with techniques turning prospects into leads into, in this case, members, dues-paying members, which is part of our mission to sustain the organization.
Nice. Well done. And you said, how long has it taken you to grow that from 50 to 12,000? We
went from in January of 2011 till today. Now,
nice.
That's just on LinkedIn. Yeah, and we have many tens of thousands. We have 15 or 20 chapters around the world. So the whole infrastructure had been scaled, but we really had to rely on social media and combined marketing techniques to make that happen.
Right. And so is that what you spend the majority of your time on now?
Well, when people say majority of your time, as you well know, you spend 24 hours a day on all the things. It's kind of hard to decide which one to do, but we've got a lot of balls in the air. But
right.
It's
What's your
part
main
of what
focus?
I do. Well, my day job is I'm an ear, nose, and throat surgeon at the University of Colorado. I'm in the School of Medicine.
Okay.
So I'm involved with basically research, education, and practice of physician entrepreneurship and ear, nose, and throat surgery.
Okay, so you're still practicing then, or still teaching?
Yes.
Okay, great. Excellent. Let me ask you, looking back on your career, obviously hindsight is 2020. What was the turning point for you and your business? Was there a dramatic shift, something that happened with you, or an aha moment for you when you finally woke up and kind of shifted your life, your business? And if so, can you share it with us?
Well, I'll go back to the story of Oncolite. I would consider, I think the short answer is most of the time these things happen when you fail, not when you succeed. So, and it's been shown that, some people learn from their mistakes and other people don't. And the question, whether it's a 4-year-old or whether it's someone in their 50s. And the question is why? And the answer, to make a very long story short based on research, is those who take personal responsibility for their mistakes seem to learn from them.
Right. Those
who don't and blame other people don't. So the question is, well, so what happened? Well, we created this company, and to make a long story short, a bunch of stuff happened. The management team went south. We ran into a bunch of hurdles. We ran into all kinds of problems that we had to negotiate. And I think what that said to me was, there's got to be a better way. And what it also said to me was, I like this. I like dealing with this stuff. I like making this better. So I think that was the turning point. And then we followed a different path and went down a different direction. And I just got real interested in the business and science of medicine and entrepreneurship, because fundamentally I'm a teacher, I'm an educator, I'm a professor, and I like helping people kind of achieve their goals.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. It's really strange that very little is learned from your successes in virtually everything. For me, has come, or my insights have come from failures, and some really incredible failures where I thought it was the end of the world, when really it was just time for me to make a shift and grow. And so I completely align and understand where you're coming from on that.
And this business of failure, as it applies to physician entrepreneurship, is interesting, because if you think about it, high school students, college students who get accepted to medical school don't get selected because they're failures. They get selected because they're lifelong overachievers and presumed successes. So when you put a person like that in a situation where you expect them to fail orally, fail often, and fail cheaply, they have a very hard time dealing with that.
Interesting.
And it's one of the problems that we have to address in the culture of medicine if we're going to innovate and fix this system. Our system is totally screwed up. And the only thing that's going to fix it is innovation. Well, if you're relying on people who don't understand failure to fix a broken system, you're stuck. And that leads me to believe that healthcare cannot be fixed from inside.
Right. Well, I think that mindset was bred from first grade of school. Is you're not rewarded for coloring outside the lines, and you're definitely not rewarded, or you're rewarded for getting everything accurate. And so for me early on, I was a terrible student, because if a strong personality wasn't around to keep me motivated and inspired, I wanted to venture and do other things. And it really puzzled me for a long time, and I come to realize that it was a bit of I guess I'll call it an entrepreneurial spirit, because I wanted to challenge the status quo. And that's what I hear you saying is you need to challenge what's going on. You need to color outside the lines, and you need to be willing to make mistakes, because that's where the quickest changes happen, rather than getting 100 on every test.
Yeah, that's true. On the other hand, you also have to make a living. And, there's this conversation about how far can you go? So, entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, there's this traditional notion of, the Lone Ranger going their own way, beating to their own drum, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is you have to play nice with people if you're going to get along, right, and if you're not going to get fired. Right. So you have to understand the limits of how much you can push. And Andy Grove, who used to be the CEO of Intel, in his book, had this notion of you can drill holes in the ship as long as it's not below the waterline.
Right. Yeah. Great point. Hey, let's. We're running a little long in this segment. What do you say we transition into the lightning round? I've got 3 questions that I sent over to you that I wanted you to think about, and you probably know the answers off the top of your head. But are you ready to transition?
Sure.
Okay, great. So my first question was, what book or program made an impact on you related to business that you'd recommend, and why?
There's a lot of really great literature out there. I was really impressed with Leading Change, John Kotter's book from the Harvard Business School, in terms of change management, developing a sense of urgency, all that business. I think the Drucker literature on innovation and entrepreneurship are sort of classics and always hold the test of time. And a third that I would mention is The Diffusion of Innovation, which is a book that was written very many, many years ago, but was the original description of innovators, early adopters, early majority, that kind of stuff. So for anyone who's interested in technological diffusion and innovation, I'd suggest that.
So, Leading Change, and I've got Drucker's book. What was the last one? Diffusion and what?
The Diffusion of Innovation.
I haven't read the, I'm not familiar with the first and the last book.
Yeah, it's Diffusion of Innovations is by Everett Rogers, Rogers.
Okay, great.
It was actually printed in 1992, but is one of those classics.
Excellent. What you ought to check out a book called Think. And it's a brilliant book wrote in the 50s or 60s. And it is manuscripts of this individual that come in and spoke to all of the people at IBM whenever IBM just produced cash registers. And it's some of the most brilliant talks, information, perspective that I've read. It's absolutely wonderful book. So let's see, what's one of your favorite tools or pieces of technology that you've recently discovered, if any, that you'd recommend to other business owners, and why?
Well, and I'll refer to the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. And how we scaled it. We're a global organization, and what we did, I think, would have been impossible without social media, and particularly LinkedIn. Basically, we built this organization around social media platforms with a local chapter network. So I'd have to say, LinkedIn is probably the most effective technology that I've used to build this organization.
Yeah, I'm a fan of LinkedIn myself. What famous quote would best summarize your belief or attitude in business?
I like the, if you haven't seen the Steve Jobs valedictory address to Stanford, I would suggest that you watch it. It's all over YouTube, and it's gone viral. And at the very end of the speech, speaking to all these smart Stanford grads, knowing that he's dying of cancer, given his story, all that other business, he basically at the end said, here's my advice, stay hungry and be playful.
Good stuff. One question out of left field for you. If you had to start over today, what would you do to get the fastest results?
Well, I'm a little uncomfortable with the notion of fastest results because, I mean, in retrospect, there are no easy solutions and there are no shortcuts. And I kind of believe that things happen when they happen for a reason. And unfortunately, I think when you try to get things done quickly and take shortcuts, it creates more problems than it solves.
Completely makes sense. I agree with you. There are no easy buttons in life, is there?
No, there's just no shortcuts. You just got to pay your dues and put in the time and hope for the best.
All right. Or there are shortcuts, but the majority of them that I've seen normally have some pretty negative collateral effects, right?
Yeah. And usually when people take those shortcuts, they compromise their ethics.
Right.
And that's not good.
Right. Excellent. Thank you for that. Remember that you can find all the links to the books and the resources mentioned in the show notes. Just go to rockstarentrepreneur.network.com and look for episode number 108. Now, before I close the show today, I want to read you a quote. And the quote comes from John F. Kennedy. And the quote reads, "Things do not happen. Things are made to happen." This is Travis Lane Jenkins signing off for now. I hope that you've been working on finding that mastermind and that personal mentor that I have mentioned in previous episodes here recently. To your incredible success, take care, my friend.